The line we cross. Monday morning at New Liberty International Airport. The morning rush at New Liberty International Airport was already swelling beyond its usual chaos. It was 6:45 a.m., and Terminal C was a maze of rolling luggage, exhausted parents, impatient business travelers, and overworked staff. The scent of burnt espresso mingled with the echo of flight announcements as lines stretched like vines around each checkpoint. Among the throng stood Melanie Cross, a poised black woman in her early 30s, dressed in a deep burgundy suit and carrying a sleek gray briefcase. Her stride was smooth, her posture straight, and her expression unreadable, a mixture of focus and calm that came from years of learning how to command a room without raising her voice. She wore her power not like armor, but like skin, natural, seamless, unshakable. But to most, she blended in, just another traveler on a Monday morning. At least, until she approached Checkpoint 3, a place that had quietly gained a reputation among airport insiders for being tight. That was the polite word they used. In truth, it was notorious for overly aggressive screenings and a history of complaints from travelers who didn't fit the mold. Unaware of what was coming, Melanie approached the line. Her mind was preoccupied with her morning agenda: a confidential meeting with an international security contractor, a quick tour of the operations wing, and a surprise evaluation of the airport's passenger experience metrics. Today was important. She wasn't just visiting. She was inspecting. Because, contrary to what the officer at Checkpoint 3 was about to assume, Melanie Cross wasn't a commuter or a tourist or a visiting dignitary. She was the newly appointed Director of Airport Public Engagement and Passenger Safety, the youngest and the first black woman ever to hold the position at New Liberty. Her job: oversee airport-wide passenger treatment, conflict resolution, and staff behavior, all under the public eye. In short, she was the final word on how travelers were handled. But she had chosen not to wear her badge today, preferring to walk the floor anonymously. She wanted to see how things really worked when no one knew who was watching. Unfortunately, that wish was about to come true in a way even she hadn't expected. Officer Darren Clay. Checkpoint 3 was manned by Officer Darren Clay, a bulky, broad-shouldered man with cropped blonde hair and a jaw clenched like a bear trap. He had transferred from another airport just 2 weeks earlier and already developed a reputation among staff as intense. Not unsafe, but not exactly calming either. His colleagues noticed he had a short fuse, especially with travelers who questioned his commands. Some even whispered he had a type. This morning, Officer Clay was on edge. A staffing issue had left his team short, a baggage alert had delayed scanning for 40 minutes, and the line was getting longer by the minute. He liked control. Today, he didn't have it. As Melanie stepped forward, he raised a hand. "You there, step out of line. Bag on the table." Melanie blinked, thrown off. "Is there a problem?" He stared at her briefcase like it was a loaded weapon. "Random screening. Step to the side. Now." A few heads turned in the line, subtle but noticeable. Melanie hesitated. "I wasn't selected at the kiosk." "I said now," Clay barked. Her eyes flicked to the screen. No random flag. No security tag. No cause. She looked up at him, calm but direct. "On what grounds, officer?" Clay's face shifted from firm to furious. It wasn't the question. It was who asked it. "You don't get to interrogate me. You move when I say move. You think attitude's gonna help you get through this?" Melanie paused. She took a breath. She remembered her purpose. Then, silently, she rolled her briefcase to the table and opened it. Inside were neatly arranged folders, a business card holder, a slim tablet, and an airport-issued badge. Face down, Clay rifled through the items like a drill sergeant, clearly frustrated by how professional it all looked. He pulled out a folder. "What's this?" "Classified." "It's an operations review file," Melanie said. "If you read the top right corner, you'll see the header. Internal use only. Department of Passenger Engagement." Clay ignored her, flipping through papers like he was hunting for contraband. Another officer, Angela Tran, a quieter presence, approached, whispering, "Darren, you sure about this one?" Clay didn't respond. Melanie, now keenly aware of the eyes on her, decided it was time. She reached into her inner blazer pocket and pulled out her ID card, not the badge, just the official identification, and calmly laid it on the table next to her open briefcase. Clay looked down, confused at first, and then read the name. Melanie Cross, Director, Passenger Safety Oversight. His hands froze. Angela's eyes widened. Melanie tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to continue the inspection, Officer Clay? Or should I call your supervisor now?" The surrounding line, now fully aware something was happening, went quiet. Clay's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in the last hour, he realized he was no longer the one in control. Silent power. Melanie didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply picked up her ID, closed her briefcase with a snap, and looked Officer Clay in the eyes. "Protocol exists to protect people, officer. All people. Your job is to apply it with fairness, not frustration. I hope this was just a bad morning. Because if it was something more, I promise you, we will get to the bottom of it." Clay's jaw twitched. "I didn't know." "That's the problem." Melanie interrupted gently. "You didn't ask." She turned to Angela. "Thank you for your professionalism. Please notify your supervisor I'll be requesting the security footage of this checkpoint from 6:30 to 7:15 a.m. Angela nodded quickly, clearly rattled. "Yes, Mom." Melanie walked past the checkpoint, briefcase in hand, posture perfect, and not once did she look back. But Officer Clay did. He stood there, stunned, humiliated, and suddenly very aware that the woman he'd just tried to intimidate could file a report that might end his career. Eyes on the floor. Upstairs in the control hub, Liam Mendez, a mid-level staff analyst who had been casually watching the monitors, had witnessed the entire exchange through the checkpoint camera feed. He knew who Melanie Cross was. Everyone in administration did. He also knew this wasn't the first time Clay had flagged someone who didn't look right. Liam leaned closer, rewinding the feed and capturing a few screenshots. He opened an encrypted internal messaging app and sent a short message to a trusted colleague in Melanie's office. "FYI, Checkpoint 3, 6:47 a.m. might be worth a look." He hesitated for a second before hitting send, then added a note. "This isn't the first. I think it's time someone sees everything." The calm before. Melanie reached the executive wing by 7:25 a.m. She greeted staff with the same grace she always did, though her mind was replaying the entire incident at the checkpoint. Not out of anger, but precision. Because she knew what came next. Paperwork, review, a private sit-down with the Internal Conduct Committee, and if the evidence was there, disciplinary action. But what Officer Clay didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Melanie Cross had been preparing for this job her entire life. Raised in a family of civil servants in Birmingham, Alabama, she had grown up hearing stories about the small battles her grandmother fought during the desegregation of public schools. She had learned from her father, a former pilot, how respect for rules and people had to walk hand in hand. She had seen this kind of treatment before. She had lived it. Now she was in a position to change it. But she also knew one thing clearly. Power doesn't always reveal itself with a uniform. Sometimes it walks quietly, watches carefully, and acts when no one else is brave enough to speak. Melanie opened her office door, placed her briefcase on the desk, and pulled up the passenger complaint log. It was time to look deeper. Checkpoint 3 might have just exposed more than one officer's bias. It might have uncovered a pattern. And Melanie Cross, she wasn't going to let that pattern go unchecked. Not on her watch. The pattern beneath the surface. The morning after. The next morning, the air at New Liberty International was dense with the usual thrum of early travel. But in her office, tucked behind a frosted glass wall on level 3, Melanie Cross was already 2 hours deep into her investigation. She hadn't slept much the night before, not because of fear, but because of clarity. When people show you who they are, she learned, you document it. She sat at her desk, reviewing the internal dashboard used by her department. Her assistant, Tasha Monroe, a sharp-eyed analyst with a knack for sniffing out inconsistencies, had pulled a decade's worth of complaint logs from Checkpoint 3. "It's not just Officer Clay," Tasha said quietly, scanning her tablet as she stood by the desk. "It's been going on for years." Melanie looked up. "What do you mean?" Tasha turned the screen. "See this. Over 130 complaints filed over the last 24 months, just at Checkpoint 3, but only 7 were flagged as legitimate enough to trigger an internal review. The rest were dismissed as unsubstantiated or unverifiable." "By whom?" Melanie asked. Tasha hesitated, mostly by the same 2 names. One of them is now retired. The other is still with TSA management. Melanie exhaled through her nose. "And let me guess, most of the dismissed complaints came from passengers of color." Tasha nodded. "Yes, or from those with foreign-sounding names." Melanie sat back, thinking. This wasn't just about Officer Clay. This was about a culture of silence, one that tolerated, and possibly even protected, discriminatory behavior, as long as it didn't make headlines. "Start compiling a breakdown," Melanie said. "I want categories: race, language, flight destination, screening outcome, everything. If there's a pattern, I want it in my hands by noon." Tasha turned to go, but paused. "You know, you're going to rattle a lot of cages with this." Melanie smiled faintly. "Good. It's about time they shook." The Whisper Network. By noon, Melanie had the preliminary report in hand. The data was undeniable. Out of all the passengers who had lodged complaints at Checkpoint 3, 73% were Black, Latino, or visibly non-white. An additional 12% were travelers with heavy accents or passports from majority Muslim countries. In over 80% of these cases, the incidents involved escalated searches, verbal intimidation, or detainment without formal documentation. But perhaps more chilling was what came next. Tasha had flagged a handful of cases labeled closed due to lack of evidence, yet when she cross-referenced them with archived footage, the timestamps still existed in the system. It meant those moments were never pulled for review, despite policy requiring them to be preserved. Someone had been burying complaints, not just ignoring them, but erasing the trail. Melanie's fingers tightened around her pen. This wasn't just a rogue officer with a chip on his shoulder. This was institutional rot, and she was standing in the middle of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're asking too many questions. Watch yourself." No name, no context, just a warning. Melanie stared at the message. Then, without hesitation, she took a screenshot, forwarded it to airport security head Liam Brooks, and typed, "Add this to the internal report. I'm being followed. Digitally, at least." Liam replied almost instantly. "Noted. We'll increase surveillance on your floor and flag your digital activity for any breaches. Stay visible." She replied with one word: always. The breakroom confrontation. By 2:15 p.m., the story had already begun circulating through the staff corridors. Melanie was digging, and everyone knew it. Some were relieved, others were nervous, and one person was furious. Officer Clay sat in the Terminal C breakroom, shoulders stiff, teeth clenched. Across the table sat Ronnie Vega, another checkpoint officer who had known Clay since they worked together at a smaller regional airport 5 years ago. "You gotta stop acting like this is a setup, man," Ronnie said. "You got caught. She's not just some woman in a suit. She's her, the one they brought in to clean up this place." Clay glared. "She embarrassed me in front of everyone. She's trying to make an example out of me." Ronnie didn't answer. Clay's voice dropped lower, more venomous. You think this is about protocol. It's about power. They hand her a title, and now she gets to rewrite the rules. Ronnie leaned forward, voice quiet. If you just treated her like anyone else. Clay slammed his fist against the table. She isn't just anyone, Ronnie. She's playing politics in a uniformed world. And now she's trying to paint me as some kind of villain. Ronnie stood up. Maybe stop acting like one. He walked out without another word. The hidden file. Back in her office, Melanie received a knock at her door. It was Gary Rollins, a grizzled retired TSA supervisor who now worked part-time auditing security policy compliance. I heard you're digging into Checkpoint 3, he said gruffly, stepping inside. Figured it's time I gave you something. Melanie arched a brow. What is it? He dropped a USB stick on her desk. Internal memos. From 2018 to 2022, complaints that were marked as sensitive and were routed away from the usual process. Some were flagged with code names. You'll find Clay's name on at least 6. Melanie picked up the drive slowly. Why give me this now? Gary looked away. Because I should have spoken up sooner. And because people need to see what happens when we look the other way too long. He left without another word. Melanie inserted the USB and opened the files. There it was, a trail of documents, some partially redacted, but enough to draw conclusions. 6 incidents involving Clay, 3 formal complaints from black passengers alleging verbal threats, 1 from a Muslim family detained for over 2 hours, 1 from a wheelchair-bound veteran, 1 from a 17-year-old girl. Melanie stared at the screen, her throat tightening, and every single complaint had been marked. Review REDI. No action taken. The meeting that changed everything. Melanie called an emergency meeting with Liam Brooks and a select handful of legal advisors from the airport's ethics board. Inside a secure conference room, she laid out the evidence. The ignored complaints, the internal cover-ups, the security footage, the USB files, her own first-hand encounter. Liam leaned back in his chair, brows furrowed. If this goes public, it's not just about Clay anymore. It's the whole oversight process. The media will pounce. Melanie nodded. That's why we need to act before they do. She turned to the ethics liaison, Cara Devlin, who had been quietly taking notes. Cara closed her folder. What are you recommending, Director Cross? Melanie's eyes were steady. Immediate suspension of Officer Clay, pending full investigation. A formal inquiry into TSA complaint handling procedures at this airport, and a public-facing campaign to let passengers know that their voices will now be heard and counted. Cara nodded slowly. You'll have opposition. I know, Melanie said, but silence is no longer an option. The first domino falls. By 5:00 p.m., news of Officer Clay's suspension hit the internal bulletin. No fanfare, just a quiet notice posted on the staff portal. The reactions were swift. Some whispered that Melanie had gone too far. Others, mostly younger staff and people of color, felt a deep wave of relief. Finally, someone was cleaning house. That night, Melanie stayed late at the airport. She walked the concourses alone, watching the custodial teams mop the tiles, the night crews unload luggage, the late travelers rush toward last flights. In all that noise and movement, she found quiet clarity. Because real change didn't come from headlines. It came from the quiet breaking of silence. One voice, one file, one truth at a time. She stood at gate 47, staring out into the tarmac. And somewhere in the deep hush of the runway lights, she promised herself this wasn't over. The system that allowed men like Officer Clay to thrive would be pulled up from the roots. Not with fury, but with truth. The shadow network. The silence after the storm. The morning after Officer Darren Clay's suspension, the atmosphere inside New Liberty International was eerily calm. Too calm. For most travelers, it was business as usual. Flights landed. Bags were claimed. Announcements echoed over the intercom like always. But within the administrative core of the airport, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Melanie Cross, seated at her glass-top desk on the third floor, stared at a new internal report. More names, more patterns, more evidence that this was bigger than just one aggressive officer. Across from her sat Liam Brooks, head of airport security operations. His expression was carved from stone. "I think we're looking at a network," he said quietly. Clay wasn't acting alone. The way his reports were dismissed, the way evidence was redirected, it's too coordinated. Melanie nodded slowly. So this wasn't just ignorance. It was protection. Exactly. They were staring down a terrifying possibility. A quiet alliance of staff members, security officers, shift supervisors, even clerical personnel who had systematically protected each other from misconduct investigations. They manipulated the system to bury accusations, protect reputations, and keep each other untouchable. And it wasn't just racism. It was about control. Control over who got pulled, who got watched, who got punished, and who got away with everything. A whisper in the wires. At 11:43 a.m., Melanie received another anonymous message. "You're getting close." That's not a compliment. Sent from a masked email address, routed through multiple proxies. Attached was a single image, a screen grab from inside her own office, likely taken from a security camera feed she didn't even know had been accessed. Her hands clenched the edges of her desk. This wasn't just resistance, it was surveillance. She immediately forwarded the message to Liam and added only 2 words. "We're compromised." Within 15 minutes, Liam had the entire third-floor server access logs pulled. His IT chief confirmed it. Someone inside the security team had administrator-level clearance and had been accessing unauthorized live camera feeds. Not just of Melanie, but also of Liam. And even the ethics committee meeting room. "This goes deeper than Clay," Liam muttered, running a hand down his face. "We've got a leak in operations." Melanie stood slowly. "Then we do it the way they never expect." Liam looked up. "How's that?" "We go public." The town hall that shook the terminal. By 2:30 p.m., the message went out via the airport's employee intranet. "Emergency staff meeting. All personnel required." 3:30 p.m. Terminal C gate hell. Whispers spread like wildfire. Staff left break rooms, operations posts, even meetings to gather in the gate hall, one of the few places large enough to hold hundreds of employees. When Melanie stepped up to the makeshift podium, the room hushed. Gone was the polished blazer. She wore a plain navy shirt, her ID clipped plainly at her collar. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and firm. "Some of you know who I am. Some of you only heard about what happened this week. But I'm not here today as an executive. I'm here as a woman who believes this airport is better than what I've uncovered. We suspended an officer this week for misconduct. That part you know. What you don't know is this. It wasn't an isolated case. There are patterns, data, eyewitness accounts, ignored complaints, suppressed video footage. What we're looking at isn't just one bad actor. It's a system that protected him." A quiet rustle spread through the crowd. Melanie stepped forward. "That system ends now. Over the next 10 days, we will be conducting a full independent audit of all misconduct reports filed within the last 5 years. Every name, every note, every login to the security system will be examined. If you've done your job with integrity, you have nothing to worry about. But if you've participated in hiding misconduct or covering for it, expect to be held accountable." Silence. Then a single clap. Then more. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was cautious. But it grew. Because the good people, the custodians, the clerks, the agents who had quietly watched injustice, they had been waiting for this moment. And now someone had given them permission to believe change was finally possible. The first cracks appear. That night, 2 employees from the TSA office approached Melanie privately. Kevin Nunes, a baggage handler turned part-time screener, and Mira Walid, a desk clerk. Both had stories. Kevin's voice shook as he recalled how he'd once tried to report the senior screener for threatening a Somali passenger, only to be reassigned and warned not to make trouble. Mira had access to complaint logs. She described how certain reports would be tagged with a special code, EF25, which routed them directly to a senior admin no one ever saw, only heard about. Melanie leaned forward. "Do you remember the name?" Mira hesitated. Only his initials were ever signed. GV, but the file paths on the server all led to one locked folder. I couldn't access it. Melanie made a mental note. The shadow network had a name now. And a gatekeeper. The man in the shadows. 3 days later, Melanie and Liam discovered who GB was. Gregory Barstow, former TSA supervisor. Retired 2 years ago. But not really. He still had remote system access. He was still listed as a technical advisor. And his badge, still active. Melanie's blood ran cold. Barstow had the power to scrub footage, reroute complaints, and manipulate who was hired or transferred. He'd been the architect of the protection ring, what insiders quietly referred to as the umbrella. Liam swore under his breath. "We've been chasing the symptoms. He's the disease." They had to move fast. Melanie called an emergency meeting with the Board of Ethics. Within 24 hours, Barstow's access was terminated. The U.S. Transportation Department was notified. A federal investigator was looped in. Melanie, Liam, and the board members signed a resolution launching Operation Clear Sky, a full-blown internal cleanse. But that wasn't the end. It was just the spark. The retaliation begins. 2 nights later, Melanie's car alarm blared outside her home. When she ran out, the windshield was shattered. A single note was tucked under the wiper blade. "Back off. Or next time, it's you." Police filed a report. Cameras showed a hooded figure, face obscured. No license plate. No witnesses. The next morning, her office email account was locked out for 2 hours. It traced the breach. Internal. Someone was still trying to stop her. But Melanie didn't stop. She doubled down. She moved her workspace to the public floor. She spoke with passengers. She visited custodial teams. She listened. Because she knew this wasn't just about cleaning up the system. This was about restoring trust in it. The anonymous hero. At 6:22 p.m., Melanie received another message. This one not a threat, but a lead. "Check internal server AeroShield. Archive 3. Password. Truth47. Tasha helped her log in. It was a vault. Hundreds of files, suppressed complaints, internal memos, handwritten notes scanned into PDFs, redacted names circled. Sensitive files were routed. The final file was a video. It showed Barstow in a private meeting with 2 officers, one of whom was Darren Clay. He used the words, "You flag who you need to flag. I'll take care of the paperwork." It was the smoking gun. Melanie sent the file to federal investigators within the hour. The reckoning had begun. Final scene. The echo in the terminal. Late that evening, Melanie walked through Terminal C alone. A little girl, maybe 8, tugged her mother's hand while pointing. "Mommy, is that the lady on the posters?" Her mother looked, smiled. "Yes, baby. That's her." Melanie offered a gentle nod. The mother whispered, "Thank you for making this place safer." Melanie nodded again, but said nothing. Because some victories don't need headlines. Just a place where people can walk, without fear, without bias, without shame. A place where justice finally got a seat at the gate. Under oath. 1 week later, Washington, D.C. The hearing chamber was colder than expected. Gray walls, polished wood floors, and a single row of windows that filtered in the cold January light. It was sterile, unforgiving, designed to make people feel small beneath the weight of institutional power. But Melanie Cross was not small. Not today. She sat upright in her dark slate suit, palms resting gently on the polished table in front of her. The seal of the U.S. Department of Transportation loomed behind her, flanked by a committee of federal ethics investigators, aviation regulators, and oversight attorneys. A nameplate before her read, Melanie A. Croestas, Director of Passenger Safety, New Liberty International Airport. To the public, she had become a quiet symbol of accountability. The woman who broke the silence. The insider who dared to pull back the curtain on a system riddled with abuse. But today wasn't about symbols. Today was about truth, documented, dissected, and placed on federal record. The lead investigator, Monica Giles, cleared her throat. Ms. Cross, you've submitted over 170 pages of evidence, 26 video files, and 14 verified testimony accounts related to internal misconduct at New Liberty. Do you stand by the accuracy of all materials? I do, Melanie said clearly. Monica leaned forward. And are you prepared to testify, under oath, that the misconduct extended beyond individual officers and into coordinated efforts to suppress passenger complaints, falsify records, and protect officers from accountability? Melanie didn't flinch. I am. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. Because now, it was on the record, and there would be no going back. A crack in the foundation. Back in New Liberty, Liam Brooks monitored the live stream from his office. His jaw was tight, his gaze unmoving. He had worked security for 19 years. He'd seen what institutional rot looked like, but even he had underestimated how far it had spread. He scrolled through his notes. Since Operation Clear Sky had launched, 7 officers had been suspended, 3 senior supervisors reassigned, and 2 were under criminal investigation. And yet, something still didn't sit right. The anonymous tips had slowed, but not stopped. Someone was still leaking, but now it was subtle. Selective. Timed. Strategic. Liam clicked open an encrypted email from a source known only as Echo. Be careful who you trust. The next name on the list isn't who you think. The attachment was a single PDF. Liam opened it and froze. Because at the top of the document, under a sealed internal audit from 2017, was the name. Melanie A. Cross, The Hidden Past. Back in D.C., Melanie stepped out of the chamber for a brief recess. Her heart was steady, her posture still strong. But inside, a familiar storm was beginning to churn. She knew this day would come. A man in a navy trench coat approached. Agent Victor Rains from the Inspector General's office. Calm, measured, unnervingly polite. Director Cross, he said, pulling her aside discreetly. We've received a file, connected to an incident in your early career, something from your time at Twin Lakes Regional. Melanie nodded slowly. Go on. Rains handed her a sealed folder. She opened it. There it was. Her name. Her badge number. Her handwriting. A passenger complaint. Mishandled. Redirected. Not maliciously, but sloppily. She had been a junior administrator back then. Overworked. Undertrained. And in that moment, she had trusted the system above the complaint. The passenger had later filed a discrimination suit, which was quietly settled. Melanie felt the heat rise to her cheeks. How did this resurface? Rains watched her carefully. Someone wants to discredit you, possibly to block the inquiry from going deeper. This doesn't invalidate your current investigation, but it complicates things. Optics matter. Melanie closed the folder. She was not the same woman she'd been then. But she wasn't going to run from her past. Facing the fire. Back inside the chamber, Monica Giles' tone had sharpened. Director Cross, are you aware of a complaint dated July 2017 at Twin Lakes Regional, in which a disabled passenger filed a grievance that was never reviewed? Melanie paused, then spoke into the mic. I am now. A murmur of confusion followed. You're acknowledging your own misstep. Melanie lifted her chin. I was young, green, And I made a critical mistake. I didn't question the system when I should have. That failure stayed with me. It's part of the reason I fought so hard in this investigation. Because I know what silence costs. Giles studied her. So you're saying your credibility remains intact, despite that? Melanie didn't blink. No. I'm saying my integrity remains intact because I'm not hiding from the truth. That answer, raw, unpolished, human, landed like a thunderclap. Even Giles seemed taken aback. There was no performance here. Just a woman owning her failure and refusing to let it define her. Back at New Liberty, Liam stared at his screen, replaying the live-stream footage of Melanie's answer. He'd known she was strong, but now he realized she was unbreakable. Still, that didn't mean she was safe. He pulled up the audit logs, traced the leak back 3 steps, and finally found it. The anonymous echo wasn't a threat. It was someone inside her office, Tasha Monroe, Melanie's assistant. The confrontation. Later that evening, Melanie returned to her hotel suite in D.C. Her voice was hoarse from hours of testimony. Her head ached. But her phone rang. It was Liam. "We need to talk. It's about Tasha." Melanie sat down. "Go on." "She's Echo. She's been feeding tips from the inside. Some helpful, some not. I think she was trying to protect you at first, but someone got to her." Melanie exhaled. "Do we know who?" "Not yet, but I'm pulling all internal logs. We'll know soon." Melanie leaned back against the wall. Tasha, the woman she had trusted to handle the most sensitive parts of this investigation. Why? Was it blackmail? Guilt? Or something deeper? The return home. When Melanie returned to New Liberty 2 days later, the entire 3rd floor of administration was silent. She walked past curious glances, past guarded stares. The city had seen the hearings. She had become a name now. Not everyone liked that. Tasha wasn't at her desk. Liam met her at the office door. "We found it," he said. "In her email." He nodded. Encrypted messages to a private server. Someone was paying her. Who? Still digging, but all signs point to a private security firm. One that contracts with major airports. Melanie clenched her jaw. They're trying to kill the investigation from the outside. Exactly. Endgame in motion. That night, Melanie filed 2 urgent notices. A motion to freeze all internal promotions until the audit concluded. A petition to the Federal Transportation Board to review all third-party security contracts at U.S. airports. The response: immediate backlash. Threats of lawsuits. Smear articles online. Old photos resurfaced. Out-of-context quotes. Manufactured scandals. But Melanie stood firm. Because for every lie printed about her, 10 passengers had come forward saying, "Thank you." Because for every whisper campaign, another staff member dropped a confidential tip. Because change never comes quiet. It comes loud, furious, and inevitable. Final scene. A single message. As she sat at her desk late one night, the building nearly empty, Melanie received one last message. A video. From an old phone camera. It showed a black teenage boy, no more than 16, being pulled out of line at checkpoint 3. Crying. Begging. While 2 officers, Clay and another man, searched his bag, his shoes, even his notebook. The timestamp. 3 months before Clay's suspension. The sender. Tasha. No subject line. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." Melanie sat there, watching the boy, watching the fear, and she knew this wasn't over. Because the real fight was just beginning. The price of truth. The headlines hit. 3 days after her testimony in Washington, the story broke wide open. Director Melanie Cross testifies against federal airport failures, security breaches, racial bias, and the woman fighting them all. Inside New Liberty International, the scandal that's rocking U.S. aviation. News vans circled the outer terminal roads. National correspondents waited outside the press entrance. Talk radio buzzed with equal parts praise and vitriol. Inside the terminal, Melanie Cross kept her routine. She walked the concourses. She checked on passengers. She greeted the janitorial team by name and asked how their shift was going. But behind her eyes, war. Because the powers she'd shaken were no longer hiding behind shadows. They were mobilizing. A board divided. That morning, Melanie was summoned to the New Liberty Airport Board of Governors, a towering room with mahogany walls, steel-trimmed chairs, and a sweeping glass window that overlooked the city skyline. 13 seats, 13 votes, most of them older, wealthier, career bureaucrats. Many had smiled at her appointment a year ago. Fewer were smiling now. At the head of the table sat Chairman Douglas Whitmore, a seasoned negotiator, ex-airline executive, and unapologetic pragmatist. Director Cross, he said evenly, the board has convened to discuss your future with New Liberty International. Melanie folded her hands. My future. Whitmore nodded. The recent media attention has disrupted airport operations. Investors are concerned. Airlines are asking questions. The board feels it may be in the airport's best interest to consider your temporary removal while the investigation concludes. Temporary removal, she repeated flatly. For your protection, said one board member. While we assess damage control, added another. Melanie looked down at her notes, then slowly raised her gaze to the board. I've complied with every audit request. I've exposed systemic misconduct. I've protected passenger rights, brought federal transparency, and put this airport's name on the map. For accountability, not corruption. Whitmore leaned back. This isn't about blame. It's about perception. No, Melanie replied, her voice low. It's about power. A silence settled over the room. And then she added, and if you try to force me out, even temporarily, I will take everything I know, every report, every email chain, every scrubbed complaint, and give it directly to the press. Another silence. Longer this time. Whitmore's jaw tightened. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, Melanie said. Allies in the shadows. Outside the boardroom, Liam Brooks waited. When Melanie exited, face unreadable, he fell into step beside her. They're circling, he said. They want me gone, she replied. Will you let them? She gave a bitter smile. They'll have to drag me out in handcuffs. Liam nodded approvingly, then handed her a manila envelope. This came in overnight, from the Department of Homeland Security's internal review team. Melanie opened it. Inside were pages of flight contracts, security firms, consultants, and subcontractors with ties to Clay, Barstow, and the now-defunct Umbrella Network. Some were still active. Some were bidding on new projects. And one of them had recently signed a quiet deal to oversee biometric scanning in the next terminal expansion. She scanned the name on the contract. Warren Dynamics Security Group. A known federal contractor. Deep ties. Political reach. The rot, it seemed, went all the way to the top. The return of Tasha. That evening, just as the sky turned pale violet over the city, Melanie's office phone rang. The caller ID read, Unknown, VOA Route 9X1. She answered. Melanie Cross. A familiar voice crackled on the line. I never meant to hurt you. Tasha. They approached me before you took the Clay case seriously. I didn't even know what I was agreeing to. It started as information requests. Then they asked for admin passwords. Then the questions got personal. Files. Timetables. I didn't know how to back out. Melanie's throat tightened. Who was it? A consultant named Kavanaugh. Claimed to work for Warren Dynamics. Said the airport board was losing patience and needed leverage to manage the narrative. I tried to protect you, but the deeper I got. Melanie exhaled. Why are you calling now? Because I stole something. Melanie froze. What? A drive. Hidden in Clay's personal locker after his suspension. He never wiped it. It has recordings, private conversations, memos, even audio of Barstow giving orders to falsify passenger logs. And something else. What? A pause. There's a video. You need to see it in person. The evidence that could break everything. They met in a diner 2 towns over. Tasha wore a hat pulled low, eyes sunken with regret and exhaustion. She slid the drive across the table wordlessly. Melanie took it. You should know, Tasha whispered. This could burn it all down. Not just Clay. Not just the airport. Melanie nodded. She didn't care. She would burn it down. If it meant building something better. Back at New Liberty, Liam locked down the idlab. Melanie inserted the drive. The folders were messy, unlabeled, chaotic. But deep inside, buried beneath layers of audio logs, was a folder titled G47_FINL. She clicked. The video began. It showed a black teenage boy, maybe 15, standing at checkpoint 3, terrified. It was the same footage Tasha had once sent in a single still. But now Melanie watched the full horror. Officer Clay barking questions, pulling the boy's hoodie off, slamming his notebook to the floor. The boy crying, saying over and over, I'm just going home. I didn't do anything. And then came Barstow's voice, off screen, but clear. Make sure the cameras log it as a malfunction. We don't need another video going viral. Melanie turned pale. The boy. He had no name. No filed complaint. No record. Just a shadow in a system that had swallowed him. The final decision. Melanie stood before the board again. Same room. Same faces. This time, she brought backup. The DHS rep. 2 attorneys. Liam Brooks. And the drive. She played the video. No words. Just raw truth. When it ended, the boardroom was dead silent. Whitmore couldn't look up. Melanie stood taller. I gave you the chance to do this quietly. To protect this airport's dignity. You chose silence. She placed the drive on the table. This goes public in 72 hours. Unless you resign. And unless every corrupt contract tied to Warren Dynamics is severed. Immediately, a murmur of disbelief swept through the room. You can't dictate our decisions, Whitmore snapped. Melanie turned to him. Watch me. Final scene. Gate 47. 1 year later. 12 months passed. Warren Dynamics was removed from all federal airport contracts. Barstow was indicted on obstruction and conspiracy charges. Clay's law enforcement credentials were stripped. New Liberty underwent a full security department rebuild, from the ground up. And Melanie? She stayed. Stronger, sharper, unafraid. She implemented a real-time complaint review system, partnered with civil rights organizations, and created a passenger dignity task force. One afternoon, as she walked past Gate 47, she saw a teenage boy, maybe 16, laughing with his mom. No fear in his eyes. Just joy. Melanie stopped for a second. A lump in her throat. She didn't know if it was the same boy. But that didn't matter. Because now, every boy like him would walk through New Liberty knowing someone was watching. And someone finally cared. The legacy we leave. 1 year later, a new chapter dawns. The sunlight hit the tarmac just right that morning, scattering golden reflections off the windows of New Liberty International Airport. Inside, the terminal hummed with familiar motion. Security announcements, rolling luggage, and morning yawns from travelers just beginning their journeys. But behind the operations wing, on the top floor where decisions shaped thousands of lives, Melanie Cross stood at her office window, looking out at the sky she'd fought to clear. A new skyline had risen. Checkpoint 3 had been rebuilt. A new passenger equity board was now embedded within airport leadership. Every traveler was protected under a real-time complaint review policy, one of the first of its kind in the country. And it had all started with one moment, one checkpoint, one decision to speak. Her inbox pinged with a message from Liam Brooks, now serving as her deputy director. Subject: Offer received. It's official. The Department of Transportation wants to offer you the position of National Director for Aviation Equity Oversight. Full authority, full reach. First woman, and first black woman, ever considered. Melanie's breath caught. It was the role of a lifetime, the opportunity to take everything she'd built at New Liberty and scale it nationwide. But underneath that opportunity lay something else, a question she hadn't wanted to face. Could she leave this airport behind? The people she fought for. Later that afternoon, she walked the terminals. No press, no entourage, just her. The custodians nodded in respect. The food vendors waved. A TSA officer whispered, "Keep going." Then, as she passed Gate 47, she paused. A familiar sight met her eyes. A boy sitting cross-legged with headphones on, backpack beside him. Maybe 15 or 16. A notebook in his lap, pen dancing across the page. He looked up and smiled at her. She smiled back. He reminded her of the boy from the footage, the one she'd never met, but who had changed everything. This place, this fight, it wasn't just a job. It had become a part of her soul, a storm reborn. The decision weighed heavily on her shoulders, but before she could choose, a storm crept in. Liam burst into her office just after 6 p.m. "We have a problem." She turned sharply. "What kind?" He tossed a tablet onto her desk. The leaked video. From another airport, JFK International. The footage showed a woman in a hijab being pulled aside, aggressively questioned, and searched by a private contractor wearing a Warren Dynamic security patch. Melanie's stomach turned. "They're still operating," she whispered. Liam nodded grimly. They pulled back from New Liberty, but rebranded, moved into other terminals, contracted under shell firms. This isn't over. The message was clear. While she cleaned up New Liberty, the rot had just relocated. Her decision was now more urgent than ever. The offer. The next morning, in a private meeting at the Department of Transportation, Melanie sat across from Secretary Alina Navarro, the head of Federal Aviation Operations. "We need someone like you, Melanie," Navarro said. "Not just at one airport. Everywhere." Navarro slid the formal offer across the table. National Director. Full access to every commercial airport in the U.S. New task force. New legislation. You'd build the foundation. Melanie looked down at the document. Her name in bold. Her legacy in motion. And yet, her heart beat not with triumph, but with conflict. "What about New Liberty?" she asked. "We'll help you appoint a successor. We need your voice in Washington." Melanie gave a slow, steady nod. "I'll need 72 hours. Goodbyes that hurt." Back at New Liberty, Melanie met privately with her leadership team. Liam. Tasha, now fully forgiven, now her most trusted data strategist. Danielle, the young HR director who had revolutionized bias training programs. They all knew what was coming. Liam was the first to speak. "We knew you'd outgrow us." She smiled gently. "I never wanted to. But maybe this is how we protect more than just one gate." Tasha added, "Then go build something big enough for all of us." They raised a toast in the staff lounge that night. Non-alcoholic sparkling cider and cheap plastic cups, but it tasted like victory. The final walk. On her last day, Melanie walked the halls one more time. Every corner, every hallway, every checkpoint she had helped rebuild. At checkpoint 3, she paused. An older man stood at the security desk. A black man in his 60s, passport in hand, laughter in his eyes. "I used to avoid flying," he said, as if sensing her thoughts. "But something changed here. Feels safer. Feels different." Melanie's throat tightened. "That's the goal." He glanced at her name badge. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "You did this. She nodded. "Thank you," he said, simply. Washington, D.C., 6 months later. Now seated in a sleek federal office overlooking the Capitol, Melanie had grown into her new role. She led hearings, reviewed contract bids, developed a digital whistleblower platform. Her national passenger equity standard was weeks away from being signed into law. She testified before Congress, advised 3 senators, and met with airline CEOs from around the world. But no title, no badge, no praise could replace what she carried in her heart. Gate 47. The boy. The choice to speak when it mattered most. One last letter. Back at New Liberty, a handwritten letter arrived in her old office. It was forwarded to her by Liam, along with a simple note. "You should read this." She unfolded it slowly. "Dear Ms. Cross, I don't know if you remember me. I was the boy in the footage. Checkpoint 3. The one crying. I didn't know anyone saw me that day. I just thought it would be another moment lost in the crowd. But you didn't let it stay lost. I saw you on TV. I heard you fought for people like me. I'm writing this from my dorm room. First year of college. Studying criminal justice. I want to work in airport security. Not to be like the men who scared me, but to be the kind of officer who protects others. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Jamal." Melanie sat for a long time, reading it again and again. She turned her chair toward the window and let herself cry, not from sorrow, but from purpose fulfilled. Because this was legacy. Not buildings, not titles, not plaques, but lives. Changed, protected, empowered. Final scene. A new generation. A year later, a training academy opens under the newly passed Passenger Equity Act. The walls are lined with photos of leaders in the aviation justice movement. Among them, one framed portrait stands tallest. Melanie A. Cross, first National Director of Aviation Equity Oversight. Below it, the plaque reads, "She didn't just open doors. She stood in the doorway until everyone was safe." And in the front row of that first academy class, Jamal. Notebook in his lap, eyes forward, the future looking brighter than ever.